You might know her as the person that single-handedly saved Beirut. Mona Hallak is here with us tonight, and we're very, very excited. She is the director of the Neighborhood Initiative at AUB, and a member and the candidate of Beirut Madinati, and we're very proud to have her tonight. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be here. As Dima said, Beirut is a 23-year-old story of my life, and it's been a beautiful story. And when I discovered this building, it was 1994, and it was the start of the complete destruction of downtown. And for me, they were destroying it for a reconstruction project. For me, it's the greatest massacre in the history of Beirut and the region. And that day, in September 1994, I decided to walk up the Green Line that Gabby talked about. And for your knowledge, it was called the Green Line because it was literally green, because the trees grew up in the asphalt on that street that nobody took for 15 years. So it was literally green. It's not a metaphor. And as I walked up, the buildings were still very sad and destroyed and burnt and squatted in with lines of laundry, water trickling, refugees meaning people who had come from the south during the war. And it was really sad to look at the Green Line at that time, and after seeing the void that Martyrs Square had. And it was a shocking thing to see Martyrs Square void, empty totally. There was nothing. I could see the sea. There was not even the statue because they took it for restoration. So I was totally lost as an architect, just not identifying my downtown. And I walked and looked at the building, talked to the people, until I reached the Sodeko intersection where Beit Beirut is, where the Barakat building was, and that was a totally different experience. I was looking at an equally destroyed building, and it was bullet-ridden, it was shelled, and it was completely destroyed, but at the same time it was totally different from every other building I saw along the Green Line, because it was yellow stone shining with bright sunshine, and you could see the sky from within it, because it has a void in the center where you can see the sky. So there was this yellow and blue, and it was a hopeful building despite its destruction. As an architect, I was intrigued. I wanted to enter. I did enter to see, and I read 1924 at the door. And I was like, 1924, an architect did this amazing space. And I went in to discover it as an architect. I went in, I saw the void, and I discovered that through this void at the center, instead of having a room at the center, it was a void which actually connected the whole building back to the city. So instead of having one corner, every room became a corner through the void. So you could be in the sixth room to the back and connect to the city. It was an eye of an architect to connect. I discovered this, and I decided to go ahead and discover the rest of the building. And there I went into the second room on the ground floor, and I was standing where Gabby must have stood during the war. Some Gabby, one of those who fought during the war. So I suddenly was standing where people killed other people. There was this thick, 2-meter thick wall. I invite you all to once join me in a tour of the Barakat building when you hear about it. And it's a 2-meter wall that has a concrete wall. It has sandbags 2 meters thick. It has another wall on the inside. It's totally, totally safe when you are on the other side of the wall. Although the building is almost destroyed, there was nothing on the other side because they protected themselves very properly. And then there were these funnel boxes where you shoot from. And I was looking, and people were passing by, and I'm like, if I were there during the war, I could have been the one who's killing that other person. And the minute I stopped, it was one minute of reflection, because I lived the whole war. I never left Beirut. And I lived on a demarcation line on the other side of the demarcation line. And I remembered there were 3 memories that came to my mind, and I tell them over and over again. I remembered I was 6 years old, and I would cry because it's deafening, the sound of the bombs. It's deafening, it's scary. And I would force my mother to come crawl down with me under our dining table, because it was a thick wood, and I would think that it would protect us. So she would be, it's okay, we don't have to hide here, it's okay. And I'm like, no, you're coming down with me. And I grab her, and then I remember her telling me, don't worry, you heard it, it will not kill you. So there's the zzz and then the boom. And it was in my head that if it passes, then the one that kills you, you don't hear it. you die, you don't hear it. And it was scary for a 6-year-old to think about this. And I remember that I wanted, there was no electricity, and to distract myself with all the bombing, I was looking at my mother's eyes, and I remember very clearly trying to figure out whether they blue or green, because they were colored, and I never understood if they were blue or green. So I remember hours of looking at my mother's eyes and saying blue or green, and there was no light in the first place, but there was something that was trying to take me away from all the bombing. And the third thing I remembered was when I was 8 years old, I passed by our living room, Qanal Sab'a, Akhbar, the news, and they were saying so many people died at the demarcation line, and they showed in black and white this hill of sand with Intabih Qannas banner, it says beware sniper, and this old man, he was in his 70s probably, hanging on to 5 or 6 or a big bunch of Arabic bread. And he's running. So obviously there was the shortage of bread, and he was taking bread to the other side. And then I hear the shot, and he falls down. And I look at him, I'm looking just at the TV, and I see this man, he's on the ground, and he wouldn't let go of the bread. He's trying, and he's alive, he's trying to crawl, but he wouldn't let go of the bread. And I'm looking at him, I'm saying, please run, please run. And I see a rope thrown at him. And then I learned that they kept ropes at demarcation lines to try and grab somebody alive. And he would not leave the bread, but he hung on to the rope, and he started to be taken to the right side. And I'm like, he's saved, and I hear the second shot. And I look at him, and and it was, the shot was at the rope, and it cut the rope. And the guy just left the rope again, and he would still hang on and he's trying to reach out to the rope again. And that's the last thing I saw. And I'm still looking for that footage in Tele-Liban, and I must find it one day. That day, when I stood, and I remember those just because I was standing in front of that wall. It didn't need an artist to tell me this is how you think about war. It didn't need an installation by Walid Raad or anything. It just needed the place to trigger all those memories. That was the day I thought to myself, if I remember, others will remember. This is a place of memory. And I started my fight to save it until today. When I stand behind those walls, every wall has almost three stations for snipers and for fighters. I always think, people think of how many people died and how many people got kidnapped. It's right, but we have to think about the people that were on this side too, because those are mostly victims. They're not only perpetrators. They didn't decide to kill. They had adrenaline. They had the power. You know, when you have a weapon, you have the power to kill. That's a big thing, and it changes lives. And I didn't understand this. I was thinking about it, and I want to hear the stories that Gabi told in Beirut. That's what Beirut is made for. It's made to tell stories, not to tell who killed who during the war and the timeline. That would be in our Museum of the Civil War one day when we decide to tell the truth, if we ever decide to tell the truth. This place is a place of human experiences. Before the war, how did the city live before the war? During the war, what did it mean for a human being to become part of the Civil War or to live the Civil War? And after the war, because those 26 years are also worth documenting. But I always think I want to go into these places, and instead of having, with all due respect, what's happening today in Beirut of many different exhibitions that are totally not the place for it, this is a place where we want people to talk and others to listen. I never think of reconciliation as people talking to each other. In our country, I think it's important for people to talk, others to listen. One day they will come together. But when I listen to Gabi, I know that somebody who was in Ashrafiyeh has exactly been through the same things he's been through. I know that a girl in Syria or in Yemen or in Afghanistan or in Gaza or in Vietnam has dragged her mother to a safe place, thinking that what I did, she did, because fear is one, loss is one, war is one. So it's a human experience. And when we do this, then we are teaching everybody who went through war what is it to make war and how futile it is. And when you are there, when you will hopefully, many of you maybe have been there, when you stand in that place, you see how stupid it was for somebody to stand there fully protected. He has 2 meters of sand and concrete in front of him and just aiming at just a person, a target. It's not a life, it's a moving target. It's an ego, it's a power. It's the power to kill. It's the power to control lives, to control a place, to control a demarcation line. It was a joke. You heard about it. It was a joke. It was a status quo. Nobody tried to invade the other. It was, I shoot now, you shoot now. So usually civil civil wars are like this. It's a game of power, and it's not real. You're not fighting the enemy. He called him the enemy. It's not the enemy. You're fighting each other. So this is what I hope Beit Beirut would do. And lately, through Beit Beirut, he has come to terms through Fighters for Peace, but many people haven't come to terms. And in Beit Beirut, I hope it will be a place where people can tell their stories, even anonymously. There was this man who came to me during one of my tours, and he listened, and I noticed that he was not like the others. He seemed to know what the place. And at the end, he came to me and he said, you know, I was here during the war. I told him, what do you mean you were here? He said, I was 12 years old, and my house is in Monroe Street, right behind the building. And this was my playground. I used to come and play here because that was the only place my mother would allow me to come and play, and they had a beautiful garden, which was the case. And he played amongst the fighters. And at 14 years old, he became a fighter. Not because he's ideologically a fighter, but because he found himself amongst people whose game is fighting. And he had the chance to hold it. Yalla, always take a shot. And he killed people at 14 years old. Today, he has 4 kids, and he's really just wanting to tell his story and to tell his kids never to take up weapons again. This is what I hope making peace. Beit Beirut is ideal to making peace, but it's not in the way it's being used today. So I hope one day we will all be in Beit Beirut, hearing stories about also what it meant to live in Beirut before the war, how the city changed, and how the people changed, and what did we do to the city after the war? What did the war do to the city, and what did our post-war reconstruction do to the city? Because it's another war, and it's another. I hope we can come to peace, to terms with the way we respect our city, respect the other, back to each other. And the last thing I'm going to tell you is I was at a hairdresser in Ashrafiyeh, and she was talking to me, and she said, I told her I worked on Beit Beirut. She said, that house, you know, I never crossed to the other side. That was 3 weeks ago. And I told her, what other side? She said, you know, there's a very nice shop for balloons and birthday things right after Beit Beirut in Basta. But I never dared to cross there. And I'm like, what do you mean you never dared to cross there? It's just like, you know, there's so much traffic, just go. He said, no, I cannot. You know, when I get to Beit Beirut, I just turn around and go back. I always wanted to get those balloons for my kid, but I didn't. That was three weeks ago. So the demarcation line is still there. It's an invisible line. And one thing I wanted also to share with you is when you go to Beit Beirut, you see a ficus tree. It's on all the way to the first floor. They had pruned it in 2008 to 0 almost. And if they didn't, it would have been today on the 3rd floor. This is one of the last testimonies, last standing trees of the Green Line. That tree was supposed to be a 2-meter sidewalk tree, which you prune every 6 months, and it decorates your sidewalk. It became 3 floors high because it was the Green Line, because nobody pruned it, because life left from the building. And it was amazing when you go to the 1st floor where all the snipers are and the graffiti is, you look and you don't see the city, you see green, because the tree filtered in all the big holes that the bombs did in the building. So there was this kind of life that took over. There was the life that went and the life that came in. And it was so peaceful to see the tree was at once the war, because it was the war, because without the war it wouldn't have been there, and it was at the same time the peace, because it kind of wrapped around the building and kept it, you know, kind of warm throughout the years. So for me, the tree was as important as the building. With a municipality like ours, they cut the tree. Today it's growing. It has grown back, but I hope nobody cuts it from now until eternity. Thank you.